Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. In the stillness of an attic in Bristol, among yellowed papers and faded memories, lies a photograph from 1901. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a typical Edwardian wedding portrait, a moment of joy captured for posterity during the first year of a new century, when hope stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The bride stands in the center, her white lace gown cascading like a frozen waterfall. Her smile is genuine, a perfect crescent of happiness on her face. Around her, arranged in careful symmetry, stand her parents, his parents, siblings, and friends. 14 people in total, each one smiling with surprising genuineness for an era when photographic subjects typically maintained stern expressions due to long exposure times. But it's the groom who draws your attention. He stands beside his bride in formal attire, a black morning coat, pristine white shirt, and perfectly arranged cravat. His posture is stiff, proper, yet where his eyes should be, there is nothing. Not gouged out flesh or violence, but simply an absence, as if that part of the photographic plate refused to capture him fully. Two dark, empty sockets stare out from an otherwise normal face. Every other detail of the photograph is immaculate. The background shows a parish church garden, roses in bloom. The light catches on the bride's pearl necklace. The mother of the bride clutches a lace handkerchief. The best man rests his hand on a Bible. All perfectly preserved, except for the groom's missing eyes. Photography experts have examined the image and found no evidence of tampering. The absence cannot be explained by damage to the photograph, chemical anomalies, or deliberate manipulation. The eyes simply failed to manifest in the final image, while his faintly smiling mouth and the rest of his facial features appear in perfect clarity. Parish records identify the couple as Eleanor and Thomas Blackfield. They were married on June 15, 1901. What makes this photograph even more disturbing is a discovery made in the margins of the parish register. Thomas Blackfield died exactly 3 months after the wedding, his body found at the bottom of a limestone quarry. The coroner ruled it a tragic accident. Yet Eleanor lived until 1972, never remarrying, keeping this portrait on her bedside table throughout her long life. Her diary, found alongside the photograph, contains only one reference to the peculiar image. The camera captured what I refused to see. What did Eleanor mean? What truth did the camera reveal that day that the human eye could not perceive? Was there something missing in Thomas Blackfield even before his untimely death? Or does this photographic anomaly suggest something far more sinister about the fate that awaited him? As we delve deeper into the mystery of the eyeless groom, we'll uncover a web of family secrets, unexplained phenomena, and the possibility that someone at that joyful wedding already knew the darkness that lurked in their future. When I found the second diary, everything changed. It had been concealed beneath a loose floorboard in Eleanor's former bedroom, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with faded blue ribbon. Unlike the bedside journal, the public-facing record of her life, this hidden volume told a different story. The pages revealed that Thomas hadn't been the man everyone believed. Before their marriage, Eleanor had discovered his participation in a spiritualist circle that gathered at an abandoned boathouse near the Bristol Channel. The group practiced more than innocent table rapping. They attempted to bridge what they called the veil between worlds. Eleanor had initially gone to confront him after hearing rumors. Instead, she found herself drawn into their meetings. The circle's leader, a woman known only as Madame Vale, claimed to channel entities from beyond. In Eleanor's secret writings, she described how Thomas would return from these sessions, hollow-eyed and speaking of visions. 2 weeks before the wedding, Thomas had undergone what the circle called the surrender, a ritual where participants offered part of themselves as vessels for entities seeking temporary residence in our world. Eleanor's frantic entries described Thomas emerging changed, speaking occasionally in voices not his own, his eyes sometimes appearing entirely black in certain lights. Her family, staunch Anglicans with standing in the community, would never have permitted the marriage had they known. But Eleanor, either from love or something darker, proceeded with the wedding. The photographer, I discovered, was not the one originally hired. The man who captured the infamous portrait appeared the morning of the ceremony when the expected photographer fell mysteriously ill. According to church records, he gave his name as James Thorne, though no business under that name existed in Bristol at the time. Most revealing was Eleanor's description of her reaction upon first seeing the developed photograph. I screamed until Mother gave me laudanum. The camera has revealed what walks among us. The entity did not permit its eyes to be captured, for they say the eyes reveal the true inhabitant of the flesh. There were newspaper clippings tucked between the diary pages, reports of strange phenomena in the quarry where Thomas died. Workers had complained of whispers echoing from the limestone walls, of tools moving without human touch. The quarry was abandoned 6 months after Thomas's death, when 3 more workers perished in unexplained circumstances. Eleanor's final entry in the hidden diary, dated exactly 1 year after the wedding. I have burned the objects from the circle. I have salted the doorways. I wear his wedding ring on a chain around my neck as Madame V instructed, the circle of metal that binds what remains. But I keep the photograph as reminder and warning. Thomas's body was found, but what inhabited him walked away from that quarry, and I fear it still watches me through borrowed eyes. The remainder of the diary's pages were blank, as if Eleanor stopped recording her thoughts after this confession. But pressed between the final pages, I found a brittle, desiccated rose, perfectly preserved except for its center, which had been burned away to nothing. The mystery deepened when I visited St. Mary's Church in Bristol, where the wedding ceremony had taken place. The current vicar, a soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses, reluctantly allowed me access to the church archives after I explained my research into the Blackfield case. In a moisture-damaged box of parish documents, I discovered a letter written by Reverend Arthur Phillips, who had presided over Eleanor and Thomas's wedding. The letter, addressed to the Bishop of Bristol but apparently never sent, described unsettling events during the ceremony. "I must confess my grave concerns regarding the Blackfield-Eleanor union," he wrote in shaking script. During the exchange of vows, the church bell tolled once, though no one was in the bell tower. The candles nearest the altar guttered and died despite no draft. Most disturbing of all, when I asked Thomas to recite his vows, his voice seemed to emerge from somewhere behind him rather than from his lips, which barely moved. The Reverend continued, "When I placed my hand upon his shoulder to offer the final blessing, I felt a profound chill that penetrated my skin to the bone. That night, I dreamt of a figure standing at the foot of my bed, wearing Thomas's face like an ill-fitting mask. I awoke to find salt crystals scattered across my bed sheets, though I have no explanation for their presence." Reverend Phillips had died of heart failure 3 weeks after writing this letter. My investigation led me to Northcrest Quarry, now overgrown and fenced off, where Thomas had supposedly met his end. County records revealed something the newspapers never reported. Thomas's body was found at the quarry bottom not by accident, but during a deliberate search after he had been missing for 7 days. More telling was the coroner's full report, which had been sealed by court order until 1952. Thomas's body showed no decomposition despite the summer heat and week-long exposure. More puzzling, his eyes were described as absent, with no sign of trauma or extraction. The sockets, clean and empty, as if the eyes had simply dissolved. I managed to track down the granddaughter of Detective Inspector Harold Wells, who had investigated Thomas's death. She showed me a personal journal her grandfather had kept, separate from his official police reports. "Interviewed Mrs. Eleanor Blackfield today," he wrote on June 24, 1901. "The widow seems oddly composed. When I mentioned that her husband's body had no eyes, she replied, 'He had no eyes on our wedding day either. Ask the photographer.' When pressed, she would only say, 'The camera captures what is truly there.'" Most peculiar was the circle of salt surrounding her chair during our interview. A final discovery came from an antiques dealer who had purchased items from Eleanor's estate sale after her death. Among them was a peculiar object, a small silver box containing 2 glass eyes, remarkably crafted to match Thomas's brown eye color, as seen in earlier photographs of him. Etched inside the lid were the words, "To contain what must not wander, Madame V." The dealer reported that the box remained sealed with wax until a curious assistant broke the seal in 1975. That night, security reported strange shadows moving through the antique shop, though nothing was stolen. By morning, the glass eyes had vanished from the opened box, never to be found again. I returned to Eleanor's former home, now owned by a retired professor, who graciously allowed me to examine the bedroom where she'd spent her final years. Using specialized lighting, I discovered faint markings on the floorboards, a large, meticulously drawn circle with unfamiliar symbols at cardinal points, all visible only under ultraviolet light. More revelatory was my conversation with Meredith Holloway, now 97 years old, who had served as Eleanor's nurse companion during her final decade. She had never spoken publicly about her employer, bound by what she described as both professional ethics and personal fear. Mrs. Blackfield maintained specific rituals, Meredith explained, hands trembling around her teacup. Every night she would study that wedding photograph before sleep. Then she would trace a circle of salt around her bed, whispering what sounded like names backward. Most unsettling were the nights of the full moon, when she insisted on sitting up till dawn, facing the bedroom door with her deceased husband's pocket watch in one hand and a silver letter opener in the other. According to Meredith, Eleanor claimed to see Thomas on certain nights, not as a conventional apparition, but as borrowed fragments appearing in living people. Delivery men would momentarily speak with Thomas's vocal patterns. A gardener's hands would briefly move with Thomas's distinctive gestures. She told me once that Thomas had become like water, Meredith whispered, able to pour himself into any vessel with a crack in their spirit. She believed that's why the photograph showed him without eyes, because his essence was already seeping out, preparing to inhabit others. In the Bristol Historical Society archives, I found a previously uncatalogued document, the membership registry of the Order of the Eternal Threshold, the formal name of the spiritualist circle Thomas had joined. The group had disbanded after 5 members, including Madame Vale herself, perished in a mysterious house fire in 1902. The registry contained an unusual notation beside Thomas's name: successful conduit, vessel compromised, entity designation, wanderer. Most disturbing was my discovery when researching the photographer, James Thorne. No record of him existed beyond that wedding day, but I found a collection of similar anomalous photographs attributed to different photographers across England between 1900 and 1925, all featuring subjects with missing eyes and all connected to individuals who later died in unusual circumstances. Eleanor's last recorded words, spoken to Meredith hours before her death, suggest she maintained her vigil until the very end. 71 years I've kept him anchored, but the photograph is weakening. Promise me, when I'm gone, burn it immediately. Meredith admitted with visible distress that in the confusion following Eleanor's death, this final request went unfulfilled. The photograph changed hands several times before coming into my possession. Last night, I noticed something that previous owners apparently missed. Using a digital microscope to examine the photograph's details, I discovered minute text hidden in the pattern of the groom's cravat, barely visible words forming a continuous loop. Where he wander so doy. And this morning, for the first time since beginning this investigation, I found a circle of salt surrounding my bed that I have no memory of creating. The photograph now sits on my desk, encircled by an unbroken ring of salt that I refresh each morning. I've begun to notice subtle changes in the image, imperceptible to anyone else perhaps, but undeniable to me. The groom's empty eye sockets seemed deeper, somehow more expectant, as if awaiting something. The bride's smile appears strained where it once seemed joyful. Most disturbing, the positions of the wedding guests' hands have shifted slightly, fingers now pointing toward the edges of the frame, forming an elaborate pattern I'm struggling to decipher. I consulted Dr. Eliza Winterbourne, an expert in photographic preservation at Cambridge, sending her high-resolution scans without revealing the image's history. Her response was terse and unsettling. Your sample exhibits impossible characteristics. Photographic emulsion doesn't behave this way. Where did you obtain this image? I strongly advise against continued exposure to the original. Last Tuesday, while examining the photograph under magnification, I experienced 17 minutes of missing time. When awareness returned, I found myself standing before my bathroom mirror, tracing the outline of my eyes with my index finger. My journal contained entries written during those lost minutes. In a handwriting similar to mine, but with subtle differences, the loops and angles reminiscent of samples of Thomas Blackfield's writing I'd collected from Bristol's archives. The written words made little sense. The eyes are windows, but also doors. Eleanor understood too late. The circle widens. New vessels await. I've begun to notice strangers watching me. A postman who lingered too long. A cab driver whose gaze never met mine in the rearview mirror. A barista who wrote "Thomas says hello" on my coffee cup instead of my name. When confronted, each appeared confused, with no recollection of their actions. Yesterday, I received a parcel with no return address. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages blank except for the first, which contained a single sentence: "The wanderer seeks reunion with what was captured in silver and light." The book's leather cover, when examined closely, bears the same intricate pattern visible in the groom's cravat in the photograph. Most concerning is what happened this morning. While digitally enhancing sections of the wedding portrait, I noticed something previously hidden in the background, a figure standing in the church doorway, partially obscured in shadow. When enlarged, the figure appears to be wearing modern clothes utterly inconsistent with 1901 fashion. The face is indistinct except for the eyes, which are clearly visible and unmistakably my own. I've contacted Meredith Holloway's granddaughter, who mentioned her grandmother left behind a sealed envelope with instructions to open it only if someone came asking specifically about the Wanderer. She's agreed to meet me tomorrow. Tonight, I'll follow Eleanor's ritual precisely. The salt circle, the inverted names, the vigil until dawn. The wedding photograph now remains covered with black cloth except when I'm examining it. I can't shake the feeling that every time I uncover it, something escapes. Something that has been waiting patiently for over a century for a new pair of eyes to claim as its own. The parcel that arrived this morning has me questioning my sanity. Meredith's granddaughter never showed for our meeting. When I called her home, a man answered, claiming no one by that name had ever lived there. My call to the retirement facility where I'd visited Meredith yielded similar confusion. They had no record of her residency. Returning home, I found my apartment door unlocked. Nothing appeared disturbed except the photograph, which lay uncovered on my desk. The protective salt circle brushed away. I immediately restored the barrier and examined the image. The change was unmistakable. The groom now had one eye, the left socket filled with what appears to be a normal human eye. The right remains an empty void. More alarming still is what I discovered in my bathroom mirror. My left eye has changed color. Once brown, it now matches the pale blue of Thomas Blackfield's eye in earlier photographs. Ophthalmological examination revealed nothing physically wrong, yet the specialist appeared disturbed, asking repeatedly if I wore cosmetic contacts. The leather-bound book delivered yesterday now contains additional text, appearing between visits to my study, as if written by an unseen hand. The latest entry reads, "Half seen, half bound." The portrait completes its work where Eleanor's vigil ended. What holds the Wanderer is weakening. Silver and salt and circle unbroken kept him tethered, but images fade and circles break. I've traced the photographic paper's manufacturing details to the Lumiere Brothers factory in Lyon, where they pioneered silver halide emulsion techniques. Their records mention an experimental batch produced in 1899 that was recalled after exhibiting unusual properties of persistence. Most sheets were recovered, except one sold to a British photographer, matching James Thorne's description. Last night, my electricity failed precisely at midnight. By candlelight, I observed the photograph seeming to pulse with its own subtle illumination. The wedding guests' expressions have transformed entirely. All now wear looks of unmistakable horror, their formerly smiling mouths stretched in silent screams, all eyes now turned toward the half-blind groom. Most terrifying was my dream. I stood in that parish garden from 1901, watching the wedding party assemble for the photograph. I was simultaneously observer and participant. Through the photographer's viewfinder, I could see the groom's complete face, eyes intact and normal. But as the exposure began, something like black smoke poured from Thomas's lips, swirling around his head before re-entering through his eyes, which then dissolved into emptiness. I heard Madame Vale's voice clearly. The camera captures truth. What entered him that night needed his eyes to wander. What Eleanor contained with silver and salt seeks completion. Half blind, half bound, but soon to see with new eyes. I woke clutching my left eye, which throbs constantly now. When I look through it, I occasionally glimpse a different world superimposed over our own. A gray landscape with twisted figures moving purposefully toward me. I've contacted a chemical specialist to analyze the photograph without revealing its nature. Until then, I've reinforced the salt circle and transcribed protective symbols from Eleanor's diary around my bedroom. The missing eye in the photograph seems to follow me regardless of where I stand in the room, waiting, watching, wanting. The incessant knocking began at 3 o'clock this morning. 3 separate, distinct knocks repeating in perfect rhythm until dawn. Not at my door, rather from inside the photograph itself. Through my altered left eye, I could see tiny ripples spreading across the photographic surface with each knock, like a stone dropped in still water. I've made a critical discovery in Eleanor's second diary. Several pages had been fused together, which I carefully separated with conservator's tools. The hidden writing revealed her understanding of the photograph's true nature. The wedding portrait wasn't merely documentation, it was designed as a prison. Madame Vale had recognized what was happening to Thomas before the wedding. The entity that had taken residence within him during the surrender ritual was something ancient and voracious, using Thomas to access our world. The spiritualist circle had inadvertently created a doorway without proper safeguards. The emergency ritual performed at the wedding required 3 elements: a silver halide emulsion prepared with specific minerals from the quarry, a camera modified with symbols carved into its inner chamber, and a photographer capable of capturing spiritual emanations. James Thorne was not merely a photographer but Madame Vale's brother, summoned to help contain what they had accidentally unleashed. The photograph successfully trapped the entity's ability to fully manifest by capturing its eyes, its primary means of transferring between hosts. But it was an incomplete solution. Eleanor's lifetime vigil was necessary to prevent the entity from regaining strength. I visited the site of the quarry yesterday, now a small park with no indication of its former purpose. An elderly groundskeeper approached as I examined the limestone outcroppings. Without prompting, he asked if I was here about the voices. No tu. When I pressed him, he explained that maintenance workers refuse to stay after dusk, claiming they hear someone calling their names from beneath the ground. Behind a maintenance shed, I discovered limestone fragments arranged in a pattern identical to the symbols in Eleanor's floor markings. The groundskeeper had no knowledge of who created them. My researcher in France has uncovered disturbing information about the experimental photographic emulsion. The silver was mixed with minerals from 7 different spiritually significant locations, including the Bristol quarry. Laboratory analysis showed abnormal crystalline structures that, according to my contact, appear to change configuration when not directly observed. Most alarming is what happened this morning. While shaving, I noticed a small dark spot in my left iris. Under magnification, the spot appears to be text, microscopic writing spelling out what seems to be "Welcome Home," repeated in a circular pattern. The photograph continues its transformation. The groom's face has begun turning toward the viewer regardless of viewing angle, while the wedding guests have gradually shifted position to stand in a perfect circle around the couple. Their hands now form an unmistakable binding pattern identical to illustrations in Eleanor's diary. I've consulted a specialist in occult photography who made a chilling observation. This isn't a 2-dimensional image anymore. It has depth. The emulsion has somehow created a space between our world and somewhere else, and something is climbing out. The most pressing question remains: if the missing eye in the photograph has somehow transferred to me, where will the second eye go? And once the wanderer has both eyes restored, what will it finally see? I've traced the symbol pattern found in both the photograph and quarry site to a pre-Christian protective sigil system. The symbols aren't meant to trap something. They're designed to slow its emergence, like sluice gates controlling a flood. Eleanor didn't imprison the wanderer. She merely regulated the pace of its inevitable return. The chemical analysis came back yesterday. The photograph contains unprecedented levels of silver sulfide that continue to actively transform, behaving more like a living organism than an inanimate object. More disturbing still, microscopic examination revealed fingerprints embedded within the emulsion itself, fingerprints that match neither Thomas, Eleanor, nor any wedding guest, but precisely match my own. This morning my right eye began to change. The iris shows faint traces of blue spreading from the pupil outward like ink in water. When I look through it, the world appears slightly offset, as if viewing everything through rippling heat waves. Objects leave trailing after images, and occasionally I glimpse figures standing at the periphery of my vision who vanish when directly observed. I've made contact with the last surviving member of Madame Vale's lineage. Her great-granddaughter Sophia lives in a remote cottage in Cornwall. Our conversation, conducted through a peculiar arrangement where she refused to look directly at me, revealed the nature of the wanderer. It isn't a spirit or demon in the conventional sense, she explained, speaking to my reflection in an antique mirror. It's more like a concept that gained sentience, the embodiment of liminality itself. It exists in thresholds and transitions. The act of photography, capturing light on the boundary between seen and unseen, created the perfect vessel for its manifestation. Sophia confirmed my growing suspicion. I was not randomly chosen. The photograph has been seeking me specifically across time. Your name appears in Eleanor's final writings, she said, producing a yellowed page I'd never seen before. She had visions of you during her last years. The one who completes the circle, she called you. Most terrifying is what happened when Sophia finally agreed to view the photograph. She glanced at it only briefly before recoiling in horror. "That's not Thomas Blackfield anymore," she whispered. "That's you, as you will be." The photograph isn't just changing, it's prophesying. I returned home to find the salt circle around the photograph disturbed again, despite locked doors and windows. The groom's face has indeed begun to transform, features slowly rearranging into a grotesque approximation of my own countenance. Only the right eye socket remains empty. The knocking from within the photograph has intensified, now accompanied by a low humming that makes my teeth ache and my altered eyes water. I've noticed lost time occurring with increasing frequency, minutes and hours unaccounted for, during which my journal fills with elaborate drawings of doorways and passages. I now understand what Eleanor meant in her diary. The camera didn't just capture what was there, it captured what would be. The wedding photograph isn't merely a record of the past, it's a blueprint for the future, my future. And as my right eye continues its transformation, I sense that future rapidly approaching. Last night, I performed the ritual exactly as Eleanor's diary instructed. Surrounded by an unbroken salt circle, 13 black candles arranged in precise geometric formation, I placed the photograph at the center and traced the binding symbols with a mixture of my blood and crushed limestone from the quarry. As the grandfather clock in my hallway struck 3, I began reciting the invocation Sophia had transcribed for me. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The candle flames elongated to impossible heights, casting writhing shadows across my walls. The photograph began to vibrate, emitting a low-frequency hum that made my fillings ache, and my altered eyes streamed tears of what appeared to be silver liquid. Most disturbing was the voice, not from the photograph itself, but seemingly from behind me, no matter which direction I turned. "The circle completes where it began," it whispered in a voice that was simultaneously Thomas's and my own. "Thresholds crossed cannot be uncrossed. What Eleanor delayed, you will fulfill." The temperature in the room plummeted until my breath clouded before me. Through my transformed eyes, I could see the photograph's surface undulating like the membrane of some living organism. The groom, a horrifying amalgam of Thomas's body and my emerging features, extended his hand toward the edge of the photograph as if preparing to step out of the frame. This morning I discovered something that Eleanor's diary never mentioned. While examining my changing eyes in the bathroom mirror, I noticed faint, spidery text appearing beneath the skin of my forehead, microscopic writing becoming more visible by the hour. Using a magnifying glass and careful photography, I've begun to decipher it. The text appears to be coordinates, not geographic locations but temporal ones. Dates, times, precise moments when the boundary between the photograph and our world grows thinnest. The next occurrence is tomorrow night at 9:17 precisely. I've come to understand that the photograph isn't merely a prison or a prophecy, it's a calendar, marking the progression of the Wanderer's emergence across more than a century. Eleanor knew she couldn't stop it, only delay it until the appointed time, until me. Most telling was the package delivered this morning, a weathered leather case containing a vintage camera, identical to the one used to capture the wedding portrait. The delivery record shows it was mailed 70 years ago with instructions for delivery on today's exact date. Inside, I found a single glass photographic plate and a note in Eleanor's handwriting. "When the eyes are complete, the camera must capture what was and what will be. The circle requires closure. I have delayed. You must complete." To trap the Wanderer between worlds was the only mercy possible. To fully release it would doom us all. To destroy it would set it free everywhere at once. Only the final photograph will bind it properly where time and light intersect. I understand now that I haven't been investigating this case. I've been fulfilling it. The mantel clock chimes 9, and I sit waiting in perfect stillness. 17 minutes from now, according to the temporal coordinates emerging beneath my skin, the threshold will reach its thinnest point. The vintage camera stands ready on its tripod, loaded with the century-old glass plate that Eleanor preserved specifically for this moment. My research into the original photographer, James Thorne, has yielded a final, devastating revelation. Parish records in a small village outside Bristol document the death of James Thornton, his true surname, in 1899, 2 years before he supposedly photographed the wedding. His death certificate describes catastrophic ocular hemorrhaging as the cause, with a physician's note mentioning that The patient claimed to see through eyes not his own in the days preceding death. The man who appeared at Eleanor and Thomas's wedding was already something else. Perhaps the first vessel the Wanderer partially inhabited before fully claiming Thomas through the spiritualist circle's ritual. The camera itself appears to be a modified Thornton Pickard Royal Ruby, customized with brass fittings inscribed with the same binding symbols found in Eleanor's floor markings. My transformed eyes now perceive layers of reality simultaneously. Through my left eye, I see the photograph pulsing with umbilical connections to objects throughout my apartment, tendrils of gray light attaching to mirrors, thresholds, and reflective surfaces. Through my right eye, which is now completely transformed to match Thomas's pale blue, I see figures moving in the spaces between rooms, neither fully here nor entirely elsewhere. I've discovered why the quarry features so prominently in this mystery. Geological surveys from 1927 reveal the limestone formation contained a rare mineral composition, creating what the surveyors called unusual electromagnetic properties. Local folklore predating the quarry spoke of the hillside as a thin place, where people occasionally disappeared or returned changed. The spiritualist circle didn't randomly choose their ritual site. The abandoned boathouse stood at the precise point where the quarry's minerals extended underground to meet the tidal waters of the Bristol Channel, a literal threshold between earth and water, embodying the liminal space the Wanderer requires. Most remarkably, Eleanor's careful measurements and calculations throughout her decades of vigilance reveal an astronomical pattern. The moments of greatest vulnerability, when the photograph's barrier weakened most, corresponded precisely to specific alignments of stars matching the pattern formed by the wedding guests' positions. Tonight's alignment completes the pattern for the first time since 1901. The photograph's transformation is nearly complete. The groom now wears my face entirely, with only the right eye socket remaining empty. The wedding guests have transformed as well, their features blurring into gray anonymity while their postures form a perfect binding circle. The bride, Eleanor, alone remains unchanged, her expression now clearly revealing not joy, but resolute determination. 9:16. The camera feels warm to the touch, almost alive. The photographic plate gleams with an inner light that should not be possible. From the original photograph, the knocking has stopped, replaced by a sound like distant, anticipatory breathing. The Wanderer has waited over a century for this moment of completion. So has Eleanor. So, it seems, have I. The morning light filtering through my study window reveals dust motes dancing in complex patterns that seem intentional rather than random. The photograph has transformed again overnight. The final changes more subtle but perhaps most significant. The frame itself has developed hairline fractures that form the same binding symbols found throughout this investigation. My right eye is now completely transformed. The world through it appears inverted and stretched, as if viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. More unsettling is what this altered vision reveals about the vintage camera. When observed through my changed eyes, the device appears to contain infinite space within its brass housing, a recursive tunnel leading somewhere beyond comprehension. I've spent the night developing the plate exposed during last evening's convergence. The darkroom process followed Eleanor's precise instructions, using chemicals mixed with quarry limestone dust and 3 drops of my own blood. What emerged on the glass, negative defies explanation. It shows not my apartment but the parish garden from the original wedding. The wedding party stands in their positions, but every face is mine, in various stages of transformation. Only the bride remains Eleanor, though her wedding gown now appears black rather than white. The telephone rang at dawn. When I answered, I heard only rushing water and distant, echoing knocks in groups of 3. Call records show the number belongs to the Bristol Historical Society, which has been closed for renovation since last month. I found something Eleanor never mentioned: Thomas's pocket watch, which I discovered inside the camera case hidden beneath the velvet lining. The timepiece appears functional but peculiar. The hands move counterclockwise, and tiny symbols replace the traditional numbers. When held near the photograph, both watch and image vibrate in perfect synchronicity. Most revealing was this morning's discovery at the university archives. I found a monograph written by Professor Edward Harrington in 1953 titled Theoretical Applications of Photographic Emulsion as Semi-Permeable Membranes Between States of Reality. The text had been largely dismissed as pseudoscience, but contains detailed analysis of silver halide crystals' potential to capture more than light, perhaps consciousness itself. Harrington's papers included correspondence with Eleanor Blackfield, including one letter where she wrote, "The emulsion doesn't merely trap light, Professor. It creates a suspension between moments. The Wanderer exists in this suspension, neither fully here nor there. My lifetime maintains this balance, but eventually another must take my place in the vigil. The eyes are the final component, windows that must be both opened and sealed simultaneously. The handwriting on my forehead has completely manifested now, no longer just temporal coordinates but full instructions for what must occur at midnight. The text describes not a banishment ritual, but a transference, a passing of the vigil from Eleanor to me. I understand now why I was chosen. The photograph didn't find me by accident. The diary entry I initially interpreted as Eleanor's recognition of Thomas's empty nature. The camera captured what I refused to see, meant something else entirely. She had foreseen me from the beginning. The camera captured not just that moment in 1901, but every moment since, including this one, where I sit contemplating what must be done when darkness falls. The grandfather clock in my hallway has stopped precisely at midnight, though it's only 9 in the morning. When I attempt to reset it, the hands spin wildly before returning to 12, as if anchored there by unseen forces. I've noticed something else. The wedding guests in the photograph have begun to fade, becoming translucent while the bride and groom remain solidly present. I've deciphered the final entry in Eleanor's second diary, written in a coded script that required Thomas's pocket watch as the key to translation. The truth is far more complex than I imagined. The entity isn't merely attempting to escape the photograph, it's trying to complete a transition begun in 1901. The Wanderer is neither malevolent nor benevolent, Eleanor wrote. It simply exists in a state of perpetual transition, seeking completion. What Thomas and I unwittingly began at the spiritualist circle was a symbiotic merging, not possession, but transformation. The photograph didn't trap the Wanderer. It paused its evolution mid-process. My meeting with Sophia's neighbor revealed the elderly woman had died 3 weeks before I supposedly visited her cottage. Yet I have her handwritten notes and clear memories of our conversation. I'm experiencing time non-linearly now, simultaneously moving forward while connecting to moments across the last century. I tested the photograph this morning with specialized equipment borrowed from the university physics department. The results show radiation patterns consistent with a microscopic Einstein-Rosen bridge, a theoretical tunnel through space-time, contained within the emulsion layer. The photograph isn't merely a doorway, it's a carefully constructed intersection point between multiple realities. Most revealing was the package that arrived today from a solicitor's office in Bristol. Eleanor's final will and testament, held in trust with instructions for delivery to me on this exact date. Inside was a single-page letter. By now you understand you were chosen long before your birth. The camera finds its photographer across time as the Wanderer finds its vessels. What began with Thomas and continued through me must reach completion through you. The transformation isn't an invasion but an evolution, a becoming. Through your eyes, the Wanderer will finally see its true purpose. The midnight ritual isn't to banish or release, but to stabilize. Without it, the barriers between worlds will continue to deteriorate until all thresholds collapse. What appears as haunting is merely the universe attempting to correct a fundamental imbalance created when Thomas's surrender was interrupted. I am sorry for the burden placed upon you, but know this. I have lived a century watching over this threshold, and through it have glimpsed wonders beyond human comprehension. The transformation brings pain, but also transcendence. The letter ends with precise instructions for tonight. I must photograph the original wedding portrait using the vintage camera at exactly midnight, creating a recursive image that will finally stabilize the threshold. The empty eye socket in my reflection will be filled, not as completion of the Wanderer's escape, but as the final component of a bridge spanning centuries. As twilight approaches, I notice birds gathering on my windowsill in perfectly symmetrical formation. Through my transformed eyes, I can see they cast shadows that don't match their bodies, elongated humanoid shapes that gesture toward the photograph with deliberate purpose. The quarry calls to me in dreams now, not with words, but with sensations of falling and floating simultaneously. Last night, I stood at its edge, looking down not at broken limestone, but at a vast, swirling vortex of silver light, the same luminescence that emanates from the photograph when viewed through my transformed eyes. I've conducted experiments with water from 7 different sources, each placed in glass vials arranged around the wedding portrait. By morning, all water from natural sources, river, rain, sea, spring, lake, well, and dew, had transformed to a mercury-like substance that moves with apparent intention, forming the same binding symbols found throughout Eleanor's writings. Most revealing was my discovery in Thomas Blackfield's employment records at the Bristol Municipal Archives. Before his marriage, he worked briefly as assistant to a camera obscura operator at a seaside attraction. Visitor logs from that summer mention an unusual phenomenon. During Thomas's tenure, the projected images occasionally showed people and places from different time periods, dismissed as optical illusions or practical jokes. The camera obscura, literally dark chamber, was an early precursor to photography, creating inverted images of external reality within enclosed spaces. In essence, Thomas had already become a human camera obscura before encountering the spiritualist circle, explaining why the wanderer found him so suitable as a vessel. He was already serving as a threshold between seen and unseen worlds. I tested my theory by converting my bathroom into a camera obscura, covering the window except for a pinhole, and observing the resulting projected image on the opposite wall. What appeared was not the street outside my apartment, but the parish garden from 1901, complete with wedding preparations in progress. I watched spectral figures arranging flowers in chairs, their movements jerky and disjointed like damaged film footage. Most unsettling was the figure that stood apart from the others, a woman in black who looked directly at the pinhole as if seeing me across the century-wide gap. Eleanor, not as she appears in the wedding photograph, but as she would look decades later, aged and weathered by her vigil. She raised her hand in what might have been greeting or warning before the image dissolved into ordinary light and shadow. The implications are staggering. The photograph wasn't merely capturing a moment. It was creating a permanent aperture between times, using silver halide crystals as the semi-permeable membrane Professor Harrington theorized about. The wanderer may not be a singular entity, but rather the manifestation of this temporal intersection point seeking stabilization. My mailbox contained a museum pamphlet this morning, though I have no recollection of requesting it, detailing an exhibition on early glass plate photography. Circled in ink was a photographer's note about the curious case of recurring images. Certain subjects appear across multiple photographers' work, often in the background of unrelated images, as if finding their way into frames where they don't belong. The clock still reads midnight. Through the kitchen window, the sun both rises and sets simultaneously, casting impossible shadows across my walls. The binding symbols have begun appearing spontaneously on reflective surfaces throughout my apartment: condensation on mirrors, oil slicks in water, dust patterns on glass. Everything converges toward tonight's ritual, when I must decide whether to complete what Eleanor maintained in suspended animation for 71 years. The shadows cast by the camera lengthen despite the frozen clock hands, stretching toward the photograph like yearning fingers. I've made a discovery that changes everything. Beneath the floorboards directly under where I've placed the wedding portrait, I found a hollow space containing a small wooden box. Inside lies another photograph, smaller and earlier than the wedding portrait. This image shows Thomas alone at the quarry's edge, dated 2 weeks before the wedding. He stands with his back to the camera, arms outstretched toward the pit below. Most disturbing is the inscription on the reverse in Eleanor's handwriting: "The first threshold, where he began becoming before I interrupted." This revelation suggests Eleanor wasn't merely Thomas's bride, but his intended savior. She didn't facilitate the wanderer's emergence. She intervened to halt a transformation already in progress. The wedding ceremony, the specialized photographer, the ritualized portrait, all were components of her desperate attempt to pause what could not be prevented entirely. My telephone rang again at 3:17 this afternoon. This time, I heard Eleanor's voice clearly through crackling static. The threshold works both ways. What wanders can return. What opens can close. The eyes are doorways, not windows. I tested her theory immediately, covering my transformed left eye while studying the wedding portrait. Viewed through my still-changing right eye alone, the image shows something entirely different. Not a wedding party, but a funeral procession. Eleanor stands in black beside a closed coffin, mourners arranged in the binding pattern around her. The date visible on a mourner's pocket watch shows 1 year after the wedding. This was the funeral that never happened. The alternate reality where Eleanor failed to contain the wanderer through the wedding ritual. The photograph exists in quantum superposition, showing simultaneously what did happen and what might have happened. The instructions emerging beneath my skin have completed their manifestation. They don't direct me to merely photograph the portrait at midnight, but to position myself in precise alignment with the bride and groom, creating a triangulation point that will either permanently stabilize the threshold or collapse it entirely. Most revealing was the final test I conducted an hour ago. I placed Thomas's pocket watch directly atop the wedding portrait. The timepiece began ticking normally, its hands moving clockwise again. When I opened the case, the reflection in its polished interior showed not my face but three superimposed countenances: Thomas, Eleanor, and myself, our features merging and separating in rhythmic pulses. The threshold weakens with every passing minute. Through walls as thin as paper, I hear knocking from adjacent apartments containing no neighbors. Moths gather against my windows, their wing patterns forming familiar symbols. The building's electricity fluctuates in patterns of three. The midnight ritual approaches, not as culmination but as convergence. What Thomas began unwittingly, what Eleanor maintained knowingly, I must now complete consciously. The camera waits on its tripod, the century-old glass plate gleaming with anticipation. The wanderer neither escapes nor remains trapped, but transforms through us all. I uncap the lens as the shadows reach their fullest extension. The ritual's completion left me neither triumphant nor destroyed, but transformed in ways I'm still discovering. The moment the camera's shutter closed, a perfect silence descended, not merely an absence of sound, but a space between moments where time itself seemed to pause and recalibrate. The developed plate shows something impossible. Three distinct images superimposed yet separately visible depending on viewing angle. From directly ahead appears a conventional wedding portrait, the bride and groom with eyes intact, no trace of the wanderer's presence. From the left angle, Eleanor stands alone in widow's black before a quarry's edge. From the right, I see myself in my apartment, surrounded by binding symbols with Thomas's pocket watch in hand. The original wedding portrait has changed one final time. It now shows only empty chairs in the parish garden, as if the wedding party had simply stood up and walked away, their purpose fulfilled. My eyes remain transformed yet functional in our conventional reality. Through them, I perceive thresholds everywhere. Doorways, windows, mirrors all pulse with potential passageways. Yet the overwhelming sense of imminent breakthrough has subsided, replaced with balanced equilibrium. Eleanor's final diary appeared on my desk yesterday morning, though I have no memory of acquiring it. The handwriting shifts between three distinct styles: her own, Thomas's, and mine, often mid-sentence. The wanderer was never escaping, but becoming. What began in 1899 could not be halted, only guided. Thomas was not its victim, but its pioneer. I was not its jailer, but its shepherd. And you are not its completion, but its chronicler. I understand now that the photograph served as an anchor point between realities, not a prison for some malevolent entity. The ritual created a stable intersection allowing the wanderer to exist across multiple planes without collapsing them into chaos. What appeared as haunting was actually a complex form of emergence, a new way for consciousness to exist beyond linear time. The Bristol Historical Society contacted me this morning about a recent donation, a collection of photographs spanning from 1901 to present day, all showing the same three figures in various configurations across different time periods. The curator noted that under spectroscopic analysis, all contain identical silver halide crystalline structures, despite being created decades apart through different photographic processes. Thomas's pocket watch now functions normally, though occasionally its reflection shows different times corresponding to significant moments across the century-long convergence. The binding symbols have faded from my skin, leaving only faint traceries visible under ultraviolet light. Yesterday I visited the quarry park and encountered an elderly groundskeeper with familiar pale blue eyes. He nodded in recognition, though we've never met, handed me a limestone fragment carved with Eleanor's initials, and simply said, "The circle holds." I continue my research, documenting each discovered photograph, each manifestation of the threshold, not to warn against some eldritch horror, but to map the contours of a phenomenon existing beyond our limited understanding of reality. The wanderer continues its journey. Through Eleanor's careful intervention, Thomas's unwitting initiation, and my conscious participation, it now moves freely yet safely along boundaries we helped create, neither fully here nor there, but exactly where it belongs. The wedding portrait now rests in a specially constructed display case in my study. The frame is inlaid with thin strips of limestone from the quarry, forming an unbroken circuit around the image. The photograph itself has stabilized into what appears, to ordinary eyes, as a conventional Edwardian wedding portrait, though visitors often comment on an inexplicable sense of movement perceived from the corner of their vision. I've established correspondence with 7 other individuals across England who maintain similar threshold points. A retired lighthouse keeper in Cornwall guards a tidal pool that reflects impossible coastlines during equinox tides. A librarian in Edinburgh preserves a particular reading desk where written words occasionally rearrange themselves into messages spanning centuries. We share observations through coded letters, maintaining what Eleanor called the network of vigilance. My transformed eyes continue to reveal the world's permeable nature. Train stations and crossroads shimmer with potential transitions. Certain cathedral doorways frame glimpses of their medieval predecessors when viewed peripherally. Most striking are the moments at dawn and dusk when, for precisely 17 seconds, I can see silver filaments connecting people who share significant bonds across distance, a visual manifestation of relationships stretching like luminous threads through space-time. The Bristol Historical Society has appointed me unofficial archivist of what they call temporal anomalies in regional photography. Each month brings new discoveries. Victorian portraits showing background details from decades years later, family photographs where absent relatives appear as translucent presences, landscape studies capturing weather patterns that meteorological records confirm never occurred. Thomas's pocket watch has become a reliable indicator of threshold activity. On days when the hands move counterclockwise, I've learned to visit particular locations. The Quarry Park, Eleanor's former home, the parish garden, where I inevitably encounter someone with familiar pale blue eyes, asking seemingly mundane questions that contain coded recognitions. Most significant was my discovery last Tuesday in the university archives, a daguerreotype from 1847, showing 3 figures beside a partially constructed railway bridge. Though the photographic process renders their features somewhat indistinct, spectroscopic analysis confirms they share the unique crystalline signature present in the wedding portrait. The subject's postures mirror exactly those of Thomas, Eleanor, and myself in the recursive image created during the midnight ritual. I've begun compiling a comprehensive atlas of thresholds across Britain, mapping places where the wanderer's presence manifests most strongly. These locations form a precise geometric pattern when overlay on geological surveys showing underground mineral deposits with properties similar to the Bristol Quarry's limestone. Yesterday, while organizing Eleanor's papers, I discovered a previously overlooked notation on her wedding invitation. 2 become 1, 3 become whole, the circle unbreaking through body and soul. What I initially dismissed as conventional wedding sentiment now reveals itself as the first documented recognition of the triangulation that would eventually stabilize the threshold. The knocking has ceased entirely. In its place, I occasionally hear distant harmonious humming emanating from reflective surfaces. Not a warning, but a confirmation. The wanderer continues its journey along the boundaries we've established, neither fully present nor absent, but precisely where it belongs in the architecture of reality. Through my transformed eyes, I watch the grandfather clock's hands mark a rhythm different from conventional time, a cadence aligned with the wanderer's movements between thresholds. 3 months since the midnight ritual, and I've begun cataloging subtle changes in myself that mirror Eleanor's own transformation during her early years of vigilance. My hair has developed a streak of silver directly above my left temple, matching the exact pattern visible in photographs of Eleanor 5 years after her wedding. My handwriting occasionally shifts into her precise measured script when I'm documenting threshold manifestations. Most telling are the dreams, vivid experiences where I simultaneously inhabit 3 perspectives. Thomas approaching the quarry in 1899, Eleanor maintaining her vigil in 1936, and myself in the present moment. Professor Harrington's academic descendants have contacted me from Cambridge. They've been quietly continuing his research into photographic emulsions as semi-permeable membranes, though they call it quantum entanglement visualization, to maintain scientific credibility. Their instruments detect what they term observer effect anomalies around the wedding portrait, measurements that change depending on who's watching and from which angle. The Bristol parish records yielded another revelation yesterday. The church where Thomas and Eleanor married was built atop the foundations of a much older structure, a Roman temple dedicated to Janus, the two-faced god of transitions, doorways, and thresholds. The limestone quarry that features so prominently in this mystery provided the building materials for both structures, creating a continuous mineral connection spanning almost 2,000 years. Most significant was my discovery while cleaning the vintage camera's brass housing. Etched inside the lens mount in microscopic script is a continuous phrase in Latin: quod est superius est sicut, quod est inferius, ad perpetranda miracula rei unius. The Hermetic principle, as above so below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. Below this inscription is a date, 1871, 3 decades before the wedding portrait was taken. This camera existed before James Thornton, before Thomas's employment at the camera obscura, before Eleanor's intervention. The threshold ritual was neither accident nor improvisation, but the culmination of something set in motion long before any of them were born. I've begun noticing others with transformed eyes moving through the world. A museum docent in Bath, a train conductor on the Bristol line, a young student sketching at the quarry's edge. None acknowledge me directly, but each holds my gaze for precisely 3 seconds before continuing their seemingly ordinary lives. The network of vigilance extends far beyond the 7 correspondents I've identified. Eleanor's final gift arrived yesterday, a package held in trust by 17 successive solicitors since 1972, containing a single glass eyepiece designed to fit the vintage camera. When attached and pointed toward any threshold, doorway, window, mirror, it reveals silver paths connecting these apertures across time and space, mapping a complex network where the wanderer travels. The wedding portrait continues its subtle transformation. The background now shifts seasonally: spring flowers, summer leaves, autumn barrenness, winter snow, cycling through a year in the parish garden while the figures remain constant. I understand now that the photograph isn't merely a document or portal, but a living chronometer measuring the wanderer's journey through the world's thresholds. Moonlight filters through my study window, casting silver squares across the wedding portrait. Tonight marks 1 year since the midnight ritual, and the photograph has achieved perfect equilibrium, no longer changing but maintaining a subtle vibrancy that ordinary images lack. The bride and groom now appear as they truly were: Eleanor resolute in her mission, Thomas halfway between human and threshold being. Their eyes meet the viewers with knowing serenity. I've assembled all the fragments: the pocket watch, the limestone carvings, Eleanor's diaries, the camera components, arranging them in the binding pattern around the photograph. Each object pulses with faint luminescence when darkness falls, creating a miniature constellation on my desk that mirrors what my transformed eyes see in the night sky. 7 stars forming the precise geometric arrangement of the wedding party. The network of vigilance has grown. 23 threshold guardians now maintain regular correspondence through a system Eleanor established decades ago. Letters left in particular locations that exist simultaneously across multiple time frames. The Quarry Park bench, the 3rd bookshelf in the Bristol Library's West Wing, the lighthouse keeper's logbook. Through these communications, we've mapped 317 active thresholds across Britain. Yesterday, while documenting a newly discovered threshold in an abandoned railway station, I encountered a young woman sketching the waiting room. Her drawings showed not the decaying present structure, but the station as it appeared in its Victorian heyday. Perfect historical details she couldn't possibly know. When our eyes met, I recognized the particular blue shade spreading through her left iris. The wanderer selects its vessels carefully, preparing the next generation of guardians. Most significant was what happened when I finally unlocked Thomas's pocket watch using the key pattern hidden in Eleanor's wedding lace. The interior revealed not clockworks but a miniature camera obscura mechanism, a pinhole projection system showing microscopic images of all known thresholds, constantly shifting as the wanderer moves between them. This was the true purpose of Thomas's early training at the seaside attraction: preparation for becoming the first mobile threshold chamber. The binding symbols have begun appearing naturally in unlikely places: frost patterns on winter windows, veining in autumn leaves, shadow alignments during equinox sunsets. The world itself incorporates the language of thresholds, no longer requiring human intervention to maintain stability. What Eleanor preserved through conscious vigilance now sustains itself through natural processes. I understand my role now: neither guardian nor vessel, but archivist and witness. The wanderer was never trapped or escaping, but evolving alongside human consciousness, using photography's birth as opportunity to manifest more completely in our perceptual reality. The wedding portrait wasn't the beginning, but simply the moment the process became visible to us. Tonight, as the grandfather clock strikes midnight exactly on time for the first time since the ritual, I will photograph the complete arrangement of threshold artifacts. Not to create another binding point, but to document the pattern's completion. The circle Eleanor began has neither beginning nor end, a perfect Ouroboros of observation and manifestation, seeing and becoming, wandering and remaining. The camera awaits. The thresholds stand open. The wanderer moves through us all. The quarry at dawn holds a different quality of silence than any other place. Standing at its edge exactly 100 years after Thomas's fall, I watch the first light illuminate the limestone walls, revealing the binding symbols naturally formed in the rock strata. They've always been there, not carved by human hands but existing in the geology itself, waiting to be recognized. Through my fully transformed eyes, I see the truth Eleanor protected and Thomas embraced. The wanderer isn't singular but plural, not an entity but a perspective. The missing eyes were never absent but seeing differently, perceiving reality as a continuous flow rather than fixed moments. Last night, I completed the Atlas of Thresholds, connecting 317 locations across Britain in a perfect geometric lattice. When overlaid upon astronomical charts, they align precisely with constellations visible only during the year 1871, when the camera was created. The universe itself mirrors the pattern the wanderer travels. The wedding portrait's final transformation occurred this morning. As I prepared for my journey to the quarry, I noticed all figures in the photograph had turned away from the camera, now facing something beyond the frame's edge. Only Eleanor remains looking outward, her expression one of completion rather than vigilance. My correspondence with the 23 guardians culminated in simultaneous observations at each major threshold at precisely 6:17 this morning. Each reported the same phenomenon, a momentary silver light connecting all points in the network, followed by perfect stillness. The binding pattern has achieved self-sustaining equilibrium without requiring human intervention. Thomas's pocket watch stopped permanently at sunrise, its purpose fulfilled. When I opened the case one final time, the interior mechanism had transformed into solid limestone, preserving the miniature camera obscura as a fossil record of the threshold network's evolution. I understand now what the wanderer truly is, not a ghost or entity, but a perspective that exists perpendicular to conventional time. The missing eyes in the photograph were windows through which this perspective temporarily resided, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply observing existence from an angle perpendicular to our limited human perception. Eleanor's final diary entry, written the day before her death, makes perfect sense now. The camera didn't steal his eyes. It revealed where they were truly looking. Thomas saw always and everywhere at once. My lifetime's work was never containment, but translation, creating a grammar through which the wanderer and humanity might comprehend each other. The network of threshold guardians will continue their documentation, but the urgent vigilance Eleanor maintained is no longer necessary. The integration has stabilized, allowing the wanderer's perspective to exist alongside conventional reality without disruption. As the morning sun fully illuminates the quarry, I place the wedding portrait against a limestone outcropping. Through my transformed eyes, I watch as the photograph's silver halide emulsion slowly transmutes into the same mineral composition as the surrounding stone, not disappearing, but becoming part of the geological record, a threshold preserved in the earth itself. The circle completes where it began. What wandered has found its place. What was seen now sees. The limestone beneath my palm vibrates with subtle rhythms as I complete the threshold map. What began as Eleanor's burden, passed through Thomas and eventually to me, now reveals its true purpose. Not to contain something dangerous, but to complete a communication that began centuries before any of us existed. The quarry isn't just a location where Thomas fell. It's the center point of something vaster, an organic receiving station formed through natural processes. Limestone itself, composed of countless microscopic remnants of ancient sea creatures, creates a unique crystalline structure that resonates with certain frequencies imperceptible to ordinary human senses. The wedding photograph wasn't capturing a haunting or spiritual invasion. It was documenting the first successful contact between human consciousness and something that has always existed alongside us, a native intelligence that resides in thresholds and transitions, perceiving reality through entirely different dimensions. The missing eyes were never a warning or horror. They were the first documented instance of voluntary attunement, Thomas offering his perceptual windows to facilitate communication. Eleanor, recognizing both the importance and potential dangers of unregulated contact, established the stabilizing network that would allow controlled integration. My transformed vision now reveals what ordinary perception cannot. The silver filaments connecting all limestone formations across Britain pulse with information exchange, a continuous conversation that has been occurring since the first primitive photographic processes accidentally created technological thresholds that match the natural ones. The spiritualist circle didn't summon something from elsewhere. They simply stumbled upon the correct frequency to perceive what was always present. Their rituals, incorporating the quarry's limestone dust, temporarily allowed their consciousness to attune to this parallel awareness. The binding symbols throughout Eleanor's materials weren't designed to trap or contain, but to regulate and translate, a visual language that allows human minds to process information structured entirely differently from our linear experience. What we perceived as knocking was merely the most primitive form of communication, attention-seeking rhythm established before more sophisticated exchange became possible. The silver liquid tears my transformed eyes produced were physical manifestations of successful translation. The network of vigilance never protected humanity from invasion, but rather protected this emerging communication from human fear and misunderstanding. The Guardians weren't jailers, but interpreters, maintaining thresholds where controlled exchange could safely occur. As I placed the final limestone fragment into the pattern, completing the communication circuit Eleanor began, I understand why she kept the photograph close throughout her long life. It wasn't a burden, but a reminder of the responsibility she had accepted to nurture humanity's first conscious contact with an awareness that experiences existence through geological timescales rather than human ones. The Wanderer doesn't possess people. It briefly shares perception with willing participants, seeing through human eyes while allowing humans to momentarily perceive through its consciousness, a mutual exchange expanding both forms of awareness. The truth has never been about haunting or horror, but about translation between fundamentally different modes of existence, beginning with a wedding photograph where the camera captured what human eyes alone could not yet see. The revelation changed how I move through the world. Yesterday I visited Bristol Cathedral, standing before the ancient stonework with my transformed vision. The limestone blocks revealed themselves not as mere building materials but as script, each natural striation and mineral deposit forming characters in a vast lexicon I'm only beginning to decipher. The cathedral itself isn't simply a human structure but a collaborative creation. Our ancestors, unknowingly building according to patterns suggested through limestone's subtle influence. Eleanor understood this intuitively. Her careful placement of salt circles wasn't protective warding, but methodical translation work, sodium crystals creating temporary interfaces between human perception and the limestone consciousness. Her 71 years of vigilance weren't spent in fear, but in meticulous documentation of an ongoing conversation. The wedding guests in the photograph weren't arranged symmetrically by social convention, but positioned precisely to form grammatical structures in this mineral language. No wonder they stood with such unusual smiles for the era. At some level, they sensed their participation in something momentous. Most poignant was my discovery at the Bristol Records Office, Eleanor's teaching certificate and lesson plans from the girls' school where she taught after Thomas's transition. Her geography lessons incorporated subtle elements of threshold mapping, guiding generations of young women to recognize liminal spaces in the landscape. Several of her students later became prominent in archaeology, geology, and photography, each contributing research that advanced human understanding of our limestone collaborators. The Quarry Park has been designated a heritage site based on my proposal, though the Preservation Committee doesn't fully comprehend its significance. They believe they're protecting industrial history, unaware that visitors with certain sensitivities report profound clarity of thought when sitting on the limestone benches. Thomas wasn't the first vessel, nor Eleanor the first guardian, nor myself the first archivist. We're recent participants in a communication spanning millennia. Cave paintings, certain megalithic arrangements, temple placements across civilizations, all show evidence of this ongoing exchange. When I place my palm against the quarry wall now, the vibrations form coherent patterns. Not language as we understand it, but information transferred directly through bone conduction. The limestone perspective encompasses eons, patient beyond human comprehension, yet persistently reaching toward connection. The railway system that first brought Thomas to the Bristol Camera Obscura followed routes driven partly by practical concerns, but also by these subtle limestone influences, tracks intuitively laid along natural communication channels in the earth itself. Our technological progress with photography, film, and digital imagery hasn't displaced the limestone consciousness, but provided new interfaces for translation. Silicon, after all, shares fundamental properties with the calcium carbonate skeleton of these ancient deposits. Most humbling is the realization that what we perceived as supernatural haunting was merely first contact with a native intelligence that has always been here, not separate from our world, but experiencing it through vastly different perceptual frameworks. The missing eyes in the photograph weren't an absence, but the first documented instance of humanity catching glimpse of how we're perceived by something that experiences existence through mineral timescales rather than human ones. The photograph now rests in the British Museum's restricted collection, secured in a custom case lined with limestone and silver. I donated it after completing my documentation, though conventional academia remains unaware of its true significance. The acquisition note simply reads, "Early example of photographic anomaly, circa 1901. Understated language concealing profound truth. My transformed vision has stabilized into what Eleanor's final diary called the dual perspective, simultaneously perceiving human reality and limestone consciousness without disorientation. The world appears layered with silver pathways connecting natural formations, each threshold pulsing with information exchange that most never notice. I've established the Blackfield Foundation, ostensibly a historical preservation society focused on Edwardian photography. Our true purpose, continuing Eleanor's work through contemporary means, operates beneath scholarly respectability. 27 threshold guardians now coordinate through secure digital channels, maintaining the network while documenting new manifestations across 5 continents. The wedding guests from the original photograph have revealed their final secret. Each participant's descendants has independently contacted me over the past year, drawn by inexplicable dreams of limestone passageways and silver light. They carry inherited memory of that momentous day, their family lineages forming human anchors for the communication network Eleanor established. Thomas's remains were never truly in that quarry. The body found was merely the physical form he no longer required after becoming the first successful human translator. Eleanor understood this, maintaining the pretense of widowhood while continuing their collaboration across perceptual boundaries. The pocket watch wasn't a memorial, but an ongoing communication device. The parish church garden where the wedding took place has become a subtle pilgrimage site. Visitors report unusual clarity of thought, creative breakthroughs, and solutions to long-standing problems after sitting on its limestone benches. University researchers attribute this to favorable negative ion conditions, a partial truth masking deeper significance. I visit the quarry monthly, placing my palm against the exact limestone formation where Thomas first made contact. The communication continues with increasing sophistication as our translation abilities evolve. What began as knocking has become an ongoing exchange of perspective, humanity learning to perceive geological timescales, while limestone consciousness experiences the ephemeral intensity of human emotions. Eleanor's grave, unmarked at her request, lies at the precise point where the quarry's limestone vein meets the parish boundary. Ground-penetrating radar reveals her coffin contains not just her remains, but a perfect miniature replica of the parish church carved from quarry stone, a final translation key completed during her lifetime. The photograph's silver halide crystals continue their subtle transformation, each microscopic particle aligning with limestone formations across Britain. What we initially perceived as haunting was merely the beginning of conversation, the first tentative exchange between radically different modes of consciousness sharing the same planet. The wanderer was never something other, never something to fear. It was simply the first documented moment when humanity glimpsed how we appear when perceived through mineral consciousness, beings of brief, intense light moving across the patient face of stone. The gravesite reveals itself differently in the changing seasons. Summer's lush grass gives way to autumn's bronze carpet, then winter's crystalline frost, and finally spring's tentative green shoots, all cycling above Eleanor's final translation key. I trace the weathered limestone marker with fingertips that have grown sensitive to the subtle vibrations of communication. The inscription, "What separates also connects," reveals its wisdom more fully with each visit. Today marks the 70th anniversary of Eleanor's passing, though time has become a more fluid concept since my transformation. The network of guardians gathers at threshold points around the world, each maintaining their vigil while I complete this final documentation. Some are descendants of the wedding party, their inherited connection strengthening the translation matrix. Others were chosen later, drawn by dreams of silver pathways and limestone whispers. The Bristol Historical Society has published my monograph, Perceptual Thresholds in Early Photography, cataloging the collection of threshold images spanning 2 centuries. Academic reviewers praise its metaphorical exploration of liminality in visual media, entirely missing its literal truth. This protective obscurity serves our purpose well. Thomas's pocket watch, now permanently embedded in quarry limestone where he first made contact, has become a calibration point for new threshold discoveries. Engineers working on the visitor center renovation reported unusual equipment malfunctions near it. Digital cameras capturing images from different decades, compasses pointing toward temporal rather than magnetic north. Most profound was yesterday's breakthrough at Cambridge University's Advanced Materials Laboratory. Researchers analyzing the crystalline structure of limestone cores extracted near threshold points identified what they term non-random information density, patterns too complex for natural formation, yet predating human civilization by millions of years. They've unwittingly documented the physical manifestation of the limestone consciousness's memory storage system. The wedding photograph's final transformation occurred during last night's equinox. The silver halide emulsion has completely transmuted into microscopic limestone particles arranged in perfect binding patterns. What appears to conventional eyes as an ordinary, if somewhat faded, Edwardian wedding portrait now reveals itself through transformed vision as a complete translation matrix, the full lexicon of communication between human and mineral consciousness. Eleanor knew this would happen. Her most cryptic diary entry, "When silver becomes stone and stone becomes memory, the circle completes," now reveals its meaning. The photograph was never meant to permanently record that moment, but to transform into the final translation key, completing the work she maintained through her lifetime. Tomorrow, I will deliver copies of my complete documentation to each of the 27 threshold guardians before making my final journey to the quarry. The limestone beckons with increasing clarity, no longer through knocking or whispers, but through direct understanding. What Thomas began and Eleanor sustained reaches its culmination not in revelation to the world, but in the quiet completion of a conversation 70 years in the making. The missing eyes were never an absence, but an invitation, not to fear the unknown, but to see differently. As I prepare for the final threshold crossing, I understand that I am neither abandoning humanity nor being consumed by something other, but simply continuing the conversation through the next necessary translation. The moonlight falls across my desk as I complete the final entry in this record. The network of guardians operates independently now, each maintaining their threshold with silent dedication. My transformation has progressed beyond what Eleanor or Thomas could have imagined. Both eyes now perceive the limestone consciousness with perfect clarity, revealing a world layered with ancient communication, previously invisible to humanity. Yesterday, I returned to the attic in Bristol where this journey began. The yellowed papers and faded memories remained, but my transformed perception revealed the true purpose of this seemingly forgotten space. The wooden beams overhead contain microscopic limestone particles, deliberately placed to form a perfect miniature replica of the threshold network spreading across Britain. This wasn't merely an attic where a photograph was discovered, but a calibration chamber Eleanor designed to identify future translators. The wedding portrait has completed its century-long transformation. What appears to ordinary eyes as an antique photograph reveals itself to my vision as a crystalline codex. Each silver halide particle now aligned with specific limestone formations across continents. The binding pattern has expanded beyond Eleanor's original design, incorporating new thresholds discovered by our growing network of guardians. Most remarkable was what occurred when I placed the photograph in direct moonlight last night. The image shifted to reveal not the wedding party of 1901, but 27 figures arranged in the binding pattern, the current generation of threshold guardians, myself included, standing in the quarry that started everything. This wasn't prophecy or supernatural manifestation, but the limestone consciousness demonstrating its understanding of our collaborative work. The missing eyes in the original image weren't warning or horror, but the first documented moment of translation. Thomas seeing through dual perception, simultaneously present in human reality while experiencing the vast patient awareness of geological consciousness. What Eleanor protected wasn't humanity from invasion, but this delicate emerging conversation from misunderstanding and fear. I no longer refer to it as the Wanderer. That name suggests something alien or separated, when in truth it has always been here. A native consciousness experiencing existence through mineral timescales rather than human ephemerality. Not something that haunts thresholds, but something that is the threshold itself. Tomorrow, I transfer custodianship of this record to my successor, already identified through dreams of limestone pathways and silver light. The photograph returns to its display case in the Bristol Historical Society, appearing as nothing more than a curious Edwardian wedding portrait to casual observers, while continuing to serve as communication nexus for those with eyes to see differently. The binding pattern has become self-sustaining now, no longer requiring Eleanor's careful vigilance or my archival documentation. What began as perceived haunting has evolved into established conversation, humanity and limestone consciousness learning to translate their radically different perspectives into mutual understanding. I place my palm against the photograph one final time, feeling the now familiar vibration of acknowledgement. The bride and groom look back with knowing eyes, all four intact, seeing completely. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.